to shift gears briefly and talk about script writing specifically. All right, so you guys are going to be writing these 5-page scripts. How many of you have written scripts before? Almost everybody. All right, you guys use script writing software?
Yeah.
Final Draft. I hate that software. I just hate it.
Google.
I haven't worked in Celtics. Google.
There's a template.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. Whatever. All these things do, all this software does, what it does is it helps you get the formatting right. And the formatting is important and it's helpful because when you're reading a lot of scripts, it's really good to be able to have consistency and get your expectations. But what's important in terms of this class, and what I want to really get you guys thinking about, is not about the formatting, but about the elements that are really important to making a script work. A script is a blueprint. A script is not a story, or it's not a novel where you're trying to give the audience reading your script every detail. All you're trying to do is give the director the tools to figure out how to shoot this scene, how to turn the story into shots that will then be constructed and made into a film later. So first of all, just a basic scene. Every scene must begin with what's called a slug line. And every slug line has 3 components. Okay, the first component is whether it's an interior or an exterior, and this is just a convention because it's so important production-wise, whether somebody's interior or exterior has a lot of ramifications. It's fundamental to know every location, is it interior or exterior, and there are basically only 3 choices, INT, EXT, or sometimes I/E, like if a scene is taking place in a doorway where one person's inside and one person's outside. Every time you change locations, you must add a new slug line. If somebody is in their bedroom and then they go into the bathroom, that is a separate location. It must have a separate slug line. Okay? Every time you change locations, it must have a new slug line. It's very important. Otherwise, when you get to production, you can get yourself in big trouble, and you didn't account for all the scenes you've got, and you're not going to be able to get your day, and you're going to have a problem.
Does time apply to locations?
Time is over here.
So if time went by.
So in general, you want to keep this time as simple as possible. Day or night is the most simple thing. Often you'll put something like continuous, right? So you say like this scene happens, O-U-S. This scene happens immediately after. It's like a continuous scene. They walk from the bedroom into the bathroom. And then you might put, interior bathroom continuous. So we know it's a continuation of time. You might say, later. Or you might say, moments later. Or, I don't know what another thing you might do. But, you might put something that's a little bit more specific to the relative time instead of just day or night. But there's no real need to put more elaborate things, 6 a.m., dusk, evening. Like, these things are not really that helpful, and they only make it more complicated later when you're trying to break down your script. So you want to keep it as simple as possible, unless it's relevant. If it's very important to your story that it happened at dawn, then yeah, you would put dawn. If it's just that that it's not dark out, it's light out, then you put day instead of night. So again, keep that time fairly simple, but it's very important to have that. Every slug line must have, again, these 3 components: the interior, exterior, the time of day or the time that it happens, and then the middle here is the name of the location. And by choosing your locations effectively in your slug line, it saves you space for the rest of your script. I don't need to now write, Joe walks into the gun store, right? I don't need to write that because we already know it's a gun store. So I can just say, Joe walks in, or I can be more specific, but I guess let me just throw in a little bit of simple action at this, and so forth. So what I have here, this is a line of action, okay? And action or stage direction in your screenplay has some very important rules to it. Now, I've capitalized my character names, and I almost didn't do it because it's a distraction. I don't care if the scripts you're writing follow proper capitalization rules. It doesn't matter. We typically capitalize the first time a character is seen, you capitalize their name. So when you're reading, oh, this is somebody I've never seen before. You don't have to do it, and certainly not in the course of this class. I don't care if you do it or not. But what is really important is that we only write active sentences. Everything must be in present tense, and everything must be activity, specific actions. If you write, Joe thinks whatever, that's a big problem. There is no way to see what Joe is thinking. If you think Joe feels, even worse. How do we know what he feels? How do we know what he's thinking? How do we know what's going on in his head? Joe expects. What the hell does that mean? How do we shoot that? How do we shoot Joe expects? Well, then you say Joe taps his fingers on the chair, right? There's an action. Everything in your script must be active verbs. Anytime you put in something that's not, the problem is you writing it think it's in your movie. It's not in your movie. It's never going to be in your movie because we can't shoot Joe expects, right? That doesn't exist. So everything in here must be an active verb. It must be a specific action that can occur. And it should always be in present tense. Okay? Now you can, again, just back to characters for a second. The first time you introduce a character, you can capitalize it. Ideally, you don't have to. But what is useful to do is to do a brief description. So I might say, Joe, 25, green, pushes open the door, right? And I made him a turtle. I don't know why, but let's do something. Let's say suave, make them a little bit more interesting, right? I don't want you to write full sentences describing your characters. We don't care what they're wearing unless it's relevant to the story. I don't care, their age isn't necessarily even relevant unless it's relevant to the story. Their race, their gender, these things are only need to put this stuff in there if it's relevant to the story. If it's not relevant, don't worry about it. But a nice little couple word, 2 or 3 word description after the first time you introduce a character is helpful. It's going to be helpful for your actors to know what you're thinking. It's going to be helpful for you guys when you have to go down and make your cast list of who you want, your character list of who you want to cast. So a little bit of description is helpful. Again, the first time you see the character name, not beyond that. And then again, so our stage direction, or our action lines, active verbs, no thinking, no feeling, none of that crap. Only physical things that can actually be seen, and that's enough about that. Then we go into dialogue, your character name centered, and again, if you did your dialogue like this, nothing terrible would happen. We would still be able to understand, your actors would still be able to read, and so forth. Wow. That would work too. Typical script writing, for feature films anyway, it's done centered like this, and it's helpful. One of the reasons why the feature film script is so specific is for timing. When you write this in the typical format, part of what works out is that every page works for about a minute of screen time. And it's an average. It's not every page is always going to be a minute, but it's an average of a typical page with about 3/4 dialogue and a little bit of action is about a minute of screen time. Of course, that could be deceptive if I say, Joe burns down the store. That only took, one little tiny line on my page, but presumably in the movie that would take more than, 1/16 of a minute. It would take probably several minutes. So there's no hard and fast rule exactly about that, but part of the reason we do this is because it works out to an average of about a page a minute. So you can add, if you want, what we call Riley's, little descriptors of Joe. Sadly says, my money is just green as anyone's, and do that in parentheses next to the character name or whatever. Don't overdo these things. A lot of times beginning filmmakers or beginning screenwriters tend to put a Riley. We say Riley because the classic one of these is, he says Riley, I don't know, whatever. It's sort of the cliche way to tell your actor how to perform. The problem with these is what you're doing is you're telling your actor how to perform. So you only want to do this, and that's a bad reason for a whole nother, that's a bad thing to do for a whole set of reasons that we'll get into when we talk about working with actors. But you don't want to tell your actor how to perform. You want them to come up with their own interpretation. And so the more of these you stick in there, the more you're not letting the actor develop their own interpretation of the script. You're telling them exactly how to feel, exactly how to deliver every line. and then you'll wind up with a stilted, unnatural performance, which no one wants. So avoid putting in these Rileys unless they are, again, relevant to the story, or if you've got something that isn't clear. If the first reading no one would ever know that was supposed to be done sadly, then yes, you'd have to put that in to describe it, and so forth. Another big no-no, the camera cranes in over Joe's shoulder, or we see the sweat on Matt's brow, blah, blah, blah. Right? Any of this crap, we see the camera, any of this stuff is telling the director how to shoot the scene. And this is, even if you're the director and you're writing your own script, it's a bad idea. Don't write shot by shot. When you're writing, write the story, write the scene. Imagine the scene in what we call the master shot. Imagine it with all the action there happening in front of you. Don't choose while you're writing, don't limit what we can see. Because what you're doing here is you're making a decision that will never be undoable. You can never, if all we shoot is, you'd say the camera cranes in over Joe's shoulder, and that's all we do, guess what? We never have a shot of Joe's face. We're always over his shoulder, that's all we have. And in order to override that, you would have to, the director would have to deliberately not do what you said, which is annoying and it's difficult. And again, if you're writing for another director, they're just going to piss them off. You're trying to tell them what to do. Again, collaboration. The idea of collaboration is the writer comes up with a story. They come up with a generic idea for the story. The director then takes their way out of time.
Yeah, 12.
All right. The director takes that action and interprets it into shots. If you're busy, even if you're the same person, if you're busy worrying about the shots while you're writing a story, you're not doing that process of iteration, of refining and refining and going through it again and again. So leave that stuff out unless it's absolutely critical. There's no other way. If the point that you want to say is that we're looking over his shoulder, write it in a way that makes us say that. You know, Joe sees so-and-so. Or, you know, if the sweat on Matt's brow, we say a single drop of sweat drips down Matt's brow. Of course they're going to have to do a close-up of that. Right? If the script says a single drop of sweat, we have to see that in a close-up. So if you write effectively, you can tell the director somewhat what to do without having to resort to specific camera moves and camera angles and stuff, which is not what your job is. So while you guys are writing, avoid this stuff as much as possible. Keep these things to simple, action, declarative sentences, and your scripts will be effective, and I promise you'll make better movies because of it.